Hi, I'm Dr. Cynthia Clark, acupuncture physician, applied clinical nutritionist, creator of Energy Evolution, and president of Longevity Wellness. And before we get started on brain focus and clarity, I have a joke for you. Why don't ninjas wear iPods? And I'm asking because I'm wearing all black and I have this white cord that is my microphone today. And the answer is because it's very visible. It's better as a visual joke. But welcome to Brain Focus and Clarity. And I hope that you are interested today in learning more about a different perspective on brain focus and clarity. And this is going to be the traditional Chinese method perspective of how we look at how the mind works. So let's get started. The first thing is to notice that the Chinese character for mind is the same character that means heart. And so you'll see that over there on the side of the screen. And there's a link to the Wikipedia article that discusses this. It is very useful to have this understanding of the paradigm of the connection between the heart and mind. Because in Chinese medicine, there is no difference between the two. The quality of the blood that flows through the heart is exactly what affects the quality of the thoughts that go through the mind. And so this is why, for example, if a person is dehydrated, then they're going to have kind of low quality blood going through the heart, and they're going to have low quality thoughts that go through their mind, which I'm certain you've experienced if you've ever been dehydrated. Speaking of, let's take a sip. Okay, first let's talk about the difference between poor memory and dementia, because these are two different differentiations. Poor memory, these are normal situations of reduced memory due to excesses and deficiencies. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. Stress can cause temporary poor memory along with heart, kidney, and spleen imbalances. But the important thing to notice there is that this is stress-induced. So once the stress, whether it's emotional or whether it's physiological, is removed, then the body tends to return to normal. Dementia is a deterioration. I guess I'm getting into some combined atomic forces there, deterioration of intellectual faculties such as memory, concentration, and judgment resulting from an organic disease or a disorder of the brain. It's often accompanied by emotional disturbance and personality changes. And by the way, Alzheimer's accounts for 50 to 75% of all dementias, with multiple infarcts, also known as vascular dementia, accounting for 15 to 20%. And the heart dominates the spirit, otherwise known as the Shen, and it controls the general condition of memory, mental activity, and consciousness. The kidneys dominate bone, marrow, the brain, and essence, and primarily controls long-term memory. Very helpful to have this understanding of a little bit different paradigm. And the spleen provides production of post-heaven Qi. What in the world is post-heaven Qi? That just means what's happening on the planet after you were born. Post-heaven Qi, in essence, thus supporting the kidneys, and the spleen primarily controls short-term memory. So here we're talking a lot about the food that you take in. That has a lot to do with your post-heaven Qi. Memory is divided between implicit and explicit memory. So implicit memory is created in learning reflexive and perceptual skills. And explicit memory is processing factual knowledge of people, places, and things, and their meanings. Length of time of memory. So short term, here we're talking about seconds to a few minutes. Intermediate is a few minutes to a few weeks, and long term is going to be years. And long-term memory, that's what's believed to be related to changes in nerve synapses. Okay, now what causes memory problems? First, a couple of just basics that aren't even on this slide. that just as a reminder that dehydration is one of the biggest causes of memory issues. I'm going to take my advice again. Dehydration is one of the biggest causes of memory issues, but so is lack of sleep. It's a huge contributing factor. And then stress. And I really can't stress that enough. I live here in Florida, and a few years back we had this terrible hurricane called Hurricane Irma. And everyone had all sorts of problems afterwards. There was no electricity, so people were hot. They were, having to do cleanup around their homes. They were working, if they were lucky, they were working off of a generator. Food was difficult to get. So it just got really, really stressful. And I noticed at this time, as I was driving along, that 1 out of every 4 people were just rolling right through the stoplights that were blinking red. So it was not a normal path that they usually took. Usually you come to the stoplight, it's red, you stop, it's green, you go. So it's a little bit different, but just a tiny little bit. And everybody knew the rules, but still 1 in 4 people would blow through that light. I thought it was really funny. I mentioned it to a friend of mine at the time, and she said, I haven't noticed that at all. I'm like, I don't think people are having that problem. And then she paused for a second and she said, oh wait, I did that. So it was exactly the statistic, right? Like 1 out of every 4. But it's a temporary thing. So, when people are going through a stressful time, then it's a little harder on the memory. So, so stress and water and sleep are our big ones there. Diet too. If you are, just a junk foodaholic, and some kiddos get into this too, and it's misinterpreted as like maybe they're not that smart or maybe they're lazy, when actually it's just their body just doesn't have the energy to do stuff. But junk foodaholics, so people that are eating pizza for every meal or eating fast food for every meal, that's really hard on the body. It's really hard to process. So those are just some basics. Now let's talk about some things a little bit next step up. So pseudo-dementia refers to depressed patients who appear to have signs of dementia, especially memory loss that remits when depression is resolved. So this is a very real thing, that depression and memory issues go hand in glove, and it's a worthy path to try to resolve it. And if you are going through this at this moment, I really feel for this. In all honesty, this runs in my family, and I can feel the effects of this one. So things that help are to try to eat a rainbow and get movement, and especially if you can in sunshine. Those are huge game changers when we're talking about depression, and that has to do with liver qi stagnation. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So chronic alcoholism can lead to dementia and something called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. So the Wernicke form of this is due to thiamine deficiency. So that's actually great news, because it's reversible with B1 therapy. Medications and recreational drug use and alcohol use can produce memory lapses, which resolve with discontinuance of the substance. So know that these are fixable things, that when you stop doing the things that are taking away your memory, that it's going to get better, and it's worth it. Okay, excess causes of poor memory. So here, excess and deficiency. Let's take a moment and talk about what this looks like. So picture a garden hose with water running through it, and step on that garden hose. On one side, you're going to get a buildup of that water, and we're going to call that excess. And on the other side, you're getting a little tiny trickle, or maybe not at all, but a little tiny trickle, and that's what we call deficiency. So just have that concept in your mind as we're talking about this. So root causes of dementia can be either excess or deficient. So excess is going to be things like emotional problems. So people that grow up with a lot of anger, or they experience a lot of anger. So this can lead to something called liver qi stagnation, and that can lead to chronic depression. So kiddos that grow up in homes with really angry parents can suffer from depression over time because they're constantly exposed to this stressful environment. Also, other excess causes. Poor diet leads to the development of turbid phlegm dampness, which blocks the orifices of the heart, causing poor memory, forgetfulness, and the inability to concentrate. So turbid phlegm dampness. Foods that are phlegmy. Here, first and foremost, you're going to think your dairy and most especially your ice cream. So that can really throw a wrench in the works. Anything that is thick, but like milk, cottage cheese, any kind of cheese, nut butters, these are all damp foods. And a little counterintuitively, alcohol is also a damp food. Even though it's thin, the way that it acts upon our body is damp. And then blood stasis prevents proper nourishment of the heart and mind. So trauma or surgery can be the sources of this kind of stasis. An injury on the basketball court can cause an injury that leads to blood stasis. And also, it's also a natural process that takes place in aging if you don't move. So blood stasis can be blood stasis and phlegm can be the root cause of all aging issues. Okay, now deficiency causes. Spleen qi deficiency can lead to heart blood deficiency. So the spleen's job is basically nourishment here. We're talking about the digestive system. It's kind of funny, but in Chinese medicine, we talk about all the different organs, but the spleen has so much responsibility in the digestive system that it's a little opposite of the Western medicine way of looking at things, where it's like, if you're a doctor and you miss spleen day in school, it's no big deal. You don't even have to make it up, right? In Chinese medicine, the spleen is the biggest meridian and organ responsible for digestion. And part of the reason for that is because the pancreas is included in the functioning of the spleen. So if the spleen is not strong and is having difficulty digesting its food, then it's not going to get strong blood to the heart. And so we can, in Western medicine, we would say, like this could be on the spectrum of anemia. This may or may not show up on a lab test. It might be what's called subclinical, which means the person is having the symptoms and the experiences of it, but their lab test might say it's normal, or the lab test might say that they're anemic. So this can be caused by poor diet, poor constitution, overwork, and excessive worry. Poor diet here, we're talking about foods that are difficult to digest. So think your fried foods. If you particularly like empanadas or, just fried, I used to have a thing for fried cheese, which is like terrible for your spleen. I had a thing for fried cheese and ice cream. Those are my two favorite things. And I really, those are not good for your spleen. So I've been in spleen remediation ever since. But I'm great about it now. I'm pretty good about it now. I'm usually good about it now. And I've learned a lot about how to rebuild the spleen because I really like my memory. Poor constitution. This is luck of the draw. Some of us walked on the planet with nice, good, strong genes, and we're not really prone to digestive disorders, or we're not really prone to aches and pains or autoimmune disorders. I remember talking to a friend one time, and I was saying that I've had some health thing that I was dealing with, probably like menstrual cramps or something. And he looked at me and he said, "Do you need water?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Do you need a sandwich?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Yeah, I'm out of ideas. That's pretty much all that's wrong. All that's ever wrong with the people in my family." And I was like, "Wow, more power to you, man." Overwork. So this can be a touchy topic, right? So overwork can happen from physical exertion, but it can also happen from mental exertion. So it might happen from like you're a construction worker and you're working hard and you can feel it, like it's hard on your body. But what about like students that are stuck, during exam times? You know how like that can feel like you're sitting and you're studying and trying to cram all this information into your head, and it's just can be really stressful, right? So that's an example of a type of overwork. And then finally, excessive worry. This worry is one of the emotions that I hear people really defend the most. I especially my parents, and I mean that both as in my clients that are parents and my actual parents. It runs in my family that people can be good at worrying, and I just want to encourage you to take a moment and walk yourself through the questions of, okay, what's actually the thing that you're thinking about with your loved one? And is there anything that you can do to help, to actually help, not like maybe help or help that isn't help? Like call them up and yell at them for getting into the sticky wicket that they're in and making you worry. That's not help. But actually help, like, oh, maybe I know somebody that might be able to assist with that particular problem. Okay, so that's helpful, right? And then set it down. And if you really want to continue worrying about it, then put it on your calendar. Say, okay, I am done worrying about this for today. I will pick this back up on Friday at 2:00. There's a great benefit for doing that. And that is, one, you're freeing up the creative circuits of your mind to actually solve the problem. And the other is that you're giving yourself permission to honor your emotions and your experiences. Like, I am going to be worried about that. But you know what? Worrying about that every night right before I go to sleep, that's just going to keep me from sleeping. And that's going to keep me from being able to do what I need to do to take care of the thing that I'm worried about. So consider hanging up the worry hat, or at the very least making a date with yourself for it so that you're not walking around with worry all the time. Okay, Chinese medicine diagnoses for poor memory are heart and spleen deficiency, kidney essence deficiency, turbid phlegm upward disturbing, liver qi stagnation, and blood stasis. So let's talk through these. We already talked about the heart and the spleen. When the spleen isn't getting the nourishment from its food, it's not going to be bringing it to the heart. And you don't have to be a Chinese medicine doctor to get that. If your digestion is weak, the cardiovascular system's job is to scoop up those nutrients and bring it to the heart. That's why we say the heart feeds first and then it serves everyone else. Well, if the nutrients that the heart is getting are weak, imagine what everybody else is getting. It's just going downhill from there. So we want to strengthen the heart. We want to strengthen the spleen. Kidney essence deficiency. Yeah, that can come from overwork and over worry and 21st century American lifestyle. Last year, Starbucks, I'm going to give you a moment to guess what the annual revenue of Starbucks last year was. You're probably thinking in the millions. Maybe you're thinking in the billions. It was $31 billion that the world spent on Starbucks last year. And just for a moment, that's not a judgment, but just for a moment, let's look at the energetics of coffee, which are hot and damp by itself. And then, of course, we tend to add cream and sugar. Cream is damp, sugar is damp. So now we've got this like phlegm ball that we're consuming first thing in the morning. And that makes our blood sugar suffer. It also makes our spleen suffer. So we reach for the coffee with cream and sugar every morning, we're heating ourselves up. We're reaching for it because we have a habit of pressing the go button and pressing the go button and pressing the go button. And then we need something to calm down because we press this go button all the time. And then we look for something else. So, one of my favorite go-tos here is not probably the societal norm, but I love it. And it's kava tea. Kava tea, because it's a calmative and it's restorative, and it's not a make you sleepy kind of herb. It's an open orifices. Reishi tea is an herb that makes you alert but calm. So it opens orifices. We like these a lot because that also helps to resolve that next one on the list, the turbid phlegm upward disturbing, when we've got all these funky foods that our bodies are trying to process and it's rising up. It's a little bit too much for us to handle. The kava helps us calm without adding, and it doesn't add any dampness to our system. Okay, next on the list is liver qi stagnation, possibly the most famous diagnosis in Chinese medicine, because it comes from these super active livers. So the liver is responsible for over 30,000 different independent actions in the body. Many of those are in the endocrine system. And by the way, the liver also regulates our emotions. So when we are exposed to toxic chemicals, which can come from walking down the street and getting a mouthful of exhaust fumes, it can come from the formaldehyde in new furniture. It can come from legit new car smell. It can come from air fresheners or perfumes. Most of the time we're pretty okay with this stuff and it doesn't really register. We don't think about, or we might not feel bad when we're around these things until we do, or until we get clean of those things, and then when we're around them we're like, ew, I don't feel so good around that. Or if you're like me and you got a really big nose, I can smell an eagle fart a mile away, so it is said. But you may be a person that is more sensitive to smell. So the other day I was out running. I'm currently training for Ironman Texas, and I was out running in my neighborhood, and there's this one particular little kind of side street that I don't tend to run down, because the last time I was training for an Ironman, they had a dog that they weren't secured, and I'm a huge dog person. I never want anything bad to happen to a dog. And this dog would just kind of go nuts and chase, and it wasn't on a lead or anything. So I just, and when the owners got involved, they got mad at me for riling up their dog by jogging by. So I just tend to avoid that street. But it was a little bit longer run. I wanted a little variety. It's been a couple years, so I ran down this street again. And this particular day, my trainings, I have run for this little block, rest for this little block, and then I just do this over and over and over again. So it's really easy to see how long it takes for me to run the piece, and then walk the piece, and then see my progress over time. And what I found was that this particular day, that house is on a corner, and there were no dogs out, thankfully, but what I couldn't see is that as I ran by, they were smoking. And I noticed that my time it took me a lot longer when I ran through the smoke. In fact, it added, like my pace went from about 10 to about 11 and a half. For one round, and that actually, it affected my pace for 3 rounds. And so it was like, oh, okay, that really makes a big difference, because it affects the functioning of my liver that processes toxins. So by the way, in comparison, a little bit later, I ran by some jasmine flowers. I think it was jasmine. I don't know. It smelled amazing. It might have been gardenia, which I also love the smell of, but it smelled amazing. It smelled so good. And I actually ran faster on that little jaunt than I did any others. So you can use those smells really positively. And just as a complete aside, if you can tolerate the smell of peppermint oil, this is an orifice clearer. And you just take a little bottle of it and, waft. Do you know this? Gently waft. So do not ever do this. Always gently waft, because you never know how much you're going to get until about the 10th waft in. And your sense of smell, a lot of people, their smell is a little lower these days. So, okay, little sidebar there. Next one up is blood stasis. And that comes from stagnation over time, or it can come from injury or surgery. Okay. Now, dementia common syndrome. So the last one was poor memory, and now we're talking about dementia. And I want to review a couple of things with you. The biggest descriptor of dementia, or the biggest co-descriptor, is the anchor, personality changes and mood imbalances. And often those will take place, anger, irritability, laughing or crying when inappropriate, and those will often take place even up to a decade before you start seeing signs of dementia. So it's really important. And severe dementia includes incontinence, apathy, and withdrawal. So if you're with a loved one and they have started to get grumpier and grumpier, especially not reasonably, irrationally so, then be aware that you might be long-term looking at some issues of dementia. And there are things that you can do about it, especially if you start earlier. The earlier you start, the better. There's a lot of information that's come out on dementia in the past couple of decades, but especially the last decade. So, okay, deficiency and emptiness of marrow. So this is going back to an essence and marrow situation. And by the way, this is also connected. It's like a more severe issue of kidney deficiency, because the kidneys release this hormone erythropoietin, and that goes to your bones, your long bones, to make white blood cells and marrow. And so this is something, where the kidneys have been affected over time. Spleen and kidney deficiency, again, phlegm, damp accumulation blocking the orifices. So it's really gummy in there. And if you'll notice, people with Alzheimer's dementia, they often crave phlegmy things, like, I want the cheeseburger, or, like, give me the cheese. They can even get angry about not getting their phlegmy foods. And then finally, blood stasis, and that might not be an argument you can win. And finally, again, blood stasis. It is one of the coolest things about Chinese medicine, I think, is the power of herbs to move blood in the body. And one of my favorite moments in school was when we were studying about one particular herb that was literally an ancient Chinese secret for thousands of years, this particular formula. And the reason that it was an ancient Chinese secret, that they didn't want to release it, is because it is a formula used by soldiers on the front line, because it is so powerful for healing, and in healing trauma. So it both stops bleeding and also moves blood, which sounds counterintuitive. It doesn't sound like you can do both of those things at the same time. It sounds like a blood thinner and a blood coagulator at the same time, but that's not how it works. In fact, in this one particular herb, that is the chief herb in this formula, those two actions are held within that one herb, and it's an analgesic. So you can imagine that it was very, very powerful when, went on the front lines. And thankfully, they figured out they could make some money off of this formula, and they released the ingredients for it. I think that happened in 2009, 2010. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of herbs that are used for reversing memory problems. So we talked about excess conditions. Excess conditions, you're going to look to a couple of herbs called Shirchongpu and Yuanzhi. Now let me be clear here that in my descriptions, I am not advising you to go out and to take massive quantities of one of these herbs. In fact, these are just a couple of the herbs that are used in poor memory and dementia formulas. They are the way that a Chinese formula is created is you're going to have somewhere between usually between like 4 and 12 herbs, and they work synergistically together. So it's like having a whole family come over to help you move, rather than just like the weakest daughter, because the family is stronger together. And even if it's not an individual that's super strong, the way they work together is very strong. So we call these, the chief herb and then the assistant herbs. And it is a very elegant style of prescribing herbs. So I'm just giving you a couple here that we want to talk about, because I want to talk about the actions of them. So Shirchongpu opens orifice, and in Yuanzhi too, opens orifices. It vaporizes phlegm. It transforms turbid dampness, and this is very important. It quiets spirit. It can be very disconcerting to have memory problems put right in front of you. Maybe it's something you don't want to even see clearly, but it can really be disruptive. And so quieting spirit is a calm kindness to include in this herbal formula. Yuanzhi, some of these sound similar, expels phlegm. So it works on the phlegm, but in a little bit different action. It opens the orifices again, and it also calms the spirit. These subtle differences in language are important because they speak to subtle differences in action. But those two herbs do work great synergistically together. I wouldn't give someone just the open orifice herbs, because I'm also going to want to give them the nourished blood herbs, the nourished kidneys, the nourished spleen. I'm going to want to strengthen them, and then I'm going to want to relieve constraint with them also. So we're just touching on the movie stars here. On the deficiency side, then we're talking about Ren Shen. And bonus points to anybody who knows what Ren Shen is, because it's one of the most famous herbal formula, or it's one of the most famous singles, and it is ginseng. Lost my microphone here. It's ginseng. There we go. And you may know ginseng from old kung fu movies, where you'll have some old kung fu master that's hunting down the perfect looking man-shaped ginseng. So ginseng is a very strong strengthener. It tonifies source qi, and it's very strong strengthening. It is very important to get accurate diagnosis when treating any of these disorders, because using Ren Shen in an excess situation, very dangerous, not good. Using Ren Shen in a deficiency situation kind of can't be beat. It's very, very, very helpful. Okay, and then finally, just a couple more Wu Wei Tsa I wanted to share, because this has gotten more popular in recent years. It is Shisandra, and it's an astringent, so it makes things really, and it's a lovely adaptogen. And then finally Gojitsa, which is one of my favorites because it goes to all 8 of the extraordinary vessels, and these are the reservoirs of energy for our 12 major meridians. So it's like putting money directly into your savings account, or your high dividend index fund. So these herbs are used in various different formulas. I do have one particular formula that I particularly like that has Gojitsa, it has choline, it has adaptogens, it's got a little bit of green tea, in it. So it's got a little bit of caffeine, but it's a great, great, great formula. And it's one that I keep pretty much always on hand because it is so great for both cognitive fitness and also Ironman training. It's my number one formula that I use for Ironman training. So if you'd like to learn more about that, I'd be happy to tell you. You are welcome to book a free 5-minute consult with me. So our information is right there on how to reach us. It's office@longevitywc.com. office@longevitywc.com. You can email or you can give us a call at 941-923-9355. Again, that's 941-923-9355. And I would be very, very, very happy to visit with you and to get a preliminary view of whether the situation that you're facing is something that can be resolved with Chinese herbal formulas. I'm Dr. Cynthia Clark, and that's Good Medicine.